Hi everyone, I'm Father Bob White, pastor of St. Victoria Parish Family in Victoria, Minnesota. And I don't have to tell you that 2020 has been a tough year, a lot of challenges. There's been COVID, there's been social unrest, people have suffered, but that's not the end of the story. People have reached out, people have cared, and good things have happened. And the good news is that ordinary people like you and I can make those good things happen, that we can reach out, that we can lend a hand, that we can build a bridge. And when we do, we make a difference, not just for others, but for ourselves. Since 2006, St. Victoria Parish has been hosting the Men Building Bridges Father-Son Prayer Breakfast. Typically, it's featured a speaker who shares a bit of a story and the importance that faith has for their lives. This year, due to COVID, we're not able to meet in person. So we've gone virtual. So in the comfort of your home, we invite the whole family to sit in. With that in mind, we have changed the name of the Men Building Bridges Prayer Breakfast to Building Bridges, simply Building Bridges. This year's program features former NFL MVP and current NFL commentator Rich Gannon interviewing Major League Baseball Hall of Famer Paul Molitor. So thanks for joining. Sit back and enjoy. I think you're going to like what you see.
Well, thanks, Father Bob. I really appreciate you having Paul and I. And what a pleasure. What a great way to start the new year. I'd be remiss if we didn't just take just a moment to say thank you for all that you continue to do for St. Victoria. You talk about building bridges. You have been a bridge builder at St. Victoria and really in the Diocese of Minneapolis and St. Paul for a long, long time. And we certainly appreciate that. I'm just thrilled to be able to sit down alongside a guy that I admired, grew up watching as I first came to Minnesota in 1987 with the Vikings. And Paul was busy tearing it up in the major leagues. And I really always want to go back to the beginning. Here's a guy that doesn't need an introduction to anybody who knows anything about Minnesota sports. But for those of you that have been living on Mars for the last 30 years, let me take a brief moment to introduce Paul Molitor. He is born and raised in Minnesota, St. Paul guy, grew up in that area, went to grade school in St. Paul, Cretin-Durham High School, went on to the University of Minnesota where he had a great career and of course spent 21 years in the major leagues with the Brewers, the Blue Jays, the Minnesota Twins, went on to manage our very own Minnesota Twins. He's a 7-time All-Star. He's a World Series champion and MVP, the American League Manager of the Year in 2017. His jersey number is retired by the Brewers, and I'm sure a number of other, probably Creighton and a number of other places. He's a member of the Baseball Hall of Fame, the class of 2004. It is an honor to welcome our very own Paul Molitor. Thanks, Paul.
Hey, Rich, man. I appreciate that. It's always kind of humbling, when you go back through the resume and think about your journey through the game of baseball, and really just a lot of gratefulness on this end for being able to fulfill those dreams and accomplish some of those things. As you know, having an opportunity to go on and have a chance to reach the highest level of your chosen sport, man, it just doesn't get much better than that.
I like to go back to the beginning. You grew up in St. Paul and you were blessed to go to St. Luke's grade school. Just talk about that experience, growing up in Catholic education. Was the
Sure.
Sister St. Joseph, is that who you had when you were growing up?
Yeah, it was, I came from a family. We had eight kids. I had 6 sisters and my brother. And, I think that you learn a lot when you're young, just about, what your dad, in my case, was doing to support our family, having a chance to get a Catholic education. I thought was a really good foundation as I went on through the rest of my life. But I'm proud to be from St. Paul, and still most of my family's over on that side of the river. But yeah, St. Luke's was a great experience for my grade school years, which takes you through eighth grade before you head on to your days of high school, which led me to Cretin.
So Cretin was a great experience, not only uh, academically, but athletically and socially. I'm sure you were with the
Sure.
Christian Brothers. What was that experience like? 4 years at Cretin.
Well, I think that when you grew up in St. Paul, a lot of kids obviously chose the public education route. But if you were going to go parochial or private, we had a few options. But so many kids in my neighborhood had thought about having the opportunity to attend Cretin, and for me, that was something that was able to happen. The education it cost money, but my family found a way to cover that, and so I really enjoyed it. Cretin, I've kept my contacts there, Rich, through the years. They do such a great program in developing young people as well as their athletic program. But to go there and have an opportunity to play three sports, I played soccer, I played basketball, I played baseball. It was just a really nice stage of my life. I think we all look back fondly on our high school years for sure.
Some people may not realize, but I did my due diligence. I did my research, Paul. You were all-state in soccer and all-state in basketball.
Yeah.
Baseball part of it. I mean, how did you decide on baseball?
Yeah, I think growing up, if you're blessed to have some athleticism, you want to be exposed to as many sports as you can. And then you kind of find which ones that you kind of take a passion towards. I love the other sports as well, but baseball was just kind of my thing. I think back to the days of, my dad taking me out in the backyard and throwing the ball around when the snow would start to melt in the spring, and then trying to play on as many teams as you could. And following the Twins, that was huge for me. I think back in those days, maybe 50 games a year were broadcast, and I listened to Herb Carneal and Halsey Hall, and I watched Killebrew and Oliva and Camilo Pascual and Earl Batty. Just goes on, and that just helped fuel a passion for the game, and kind of inspired my dream about trying to take baseball as far as I could.
Paul, you and I had similar upbringings. I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to Catholic school for 12 years, into St. Cecilia's Parish, and then off to St. Joe's Prep. And, when I often think back, I never asked to be baptized. I never asked to go to Catholic school. I never asked to, receive the sacraments. But there was some turning point in my career when I was about 21 years old, when I was with the Minnesota Vikings. I sat down with Tom Lamphere, who was with Athletes in Action, and we started talking about the decisions we make in life. And I realized at that time, like, I never really made that decision. Like, my parents kind of made it for me. And I just continued to go to church and do those things only because that's kind of what I was brought up to do. How about you? When did you decide for yourself? Like, look, this faith component, this relationship with Jesus is really important.
Well, first let me say that, everybody that has chosen to accept the plan that God has laid out for us, and that Jesus is the answer for our opportunity to reach salvation and eternal life. They're all different, and your faith journey takes on, a lot of twists and turns, and mine certainly falls in that category. I like you had that upbringing where I was exposed to that as a kid, but a lot of it when you're young is more like what you're supposed to do or have to do rather than what you choose to do. And for me, when I got into the end of my college years, I just really sensed that there was a lacking of the direction of my life as far as the spiritual aspect. And I was fortunate to learn more about the whole idea of having a personal relationship with Christ through a teammate of mine who was a member of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes program. And, the story is long, but that was kind of the turning point for me when I decided that was a commitment I needed to make. And I guess the irony, Rich, is that I'm not even sure if that's the right word, but, the last 40 years of my life since I had made that decision to follow Christ as a college junior, I've had a lot of struggles. And, personally, I've gone through some things, both in relationships, marriage-wise, and things that affected my early professional career when I kind of got a little bit full of myself. But it's just been a constant growth period. And really, without having Christ as a foundation, I would not have the hope that I do today. And, just the security of what I know that he has provided through the sacrifice that he made for me.
There's always people along the way that help us on our journey. Who were some of the people that, when you were growing up, helped make you the man you are today?
Yeah, I think we're all grateful for people in our life that were influential, especially in a push towards a positive lifestyle. And, I always start with my dad. I just think that, growing up in St. Paul, and I think I understood at an early age the sacrifices that he made to try to keep a family of 8 going. I think you learn a lot about, just the importance of a leadership in the household. I think of his work ethic, things that he did that were really tremendously exemplary for me to follow. In my faith journey, it was other people that were influential along the way. Certainly, that college teammate that I mentioned, and then other mentors that I've had. There's a guy a church I went to in Milwaukee way back in the early '80s. Him and I have maintained a friendship for over the past almost 40 years now. And I just think that in your growth, it's important to have men in your life that really sharpen you. As iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. And just to help keep us on track, to be supportive, to mentor people, to find a way to continue the growth in our spiritual life, even as we get into our later years.
Paul, you mentioned a mentor, and throughout your life, you've been a mentor. When you were a player, when you were a manager, now that you're done, you're still giving back to the game. You're still giving back to young people. What advice would you have for young people who are trying to figure out whether they specialize in an individual sport like so many Minnesotans do with hockey, or to do multiple sports? You mentioned you were a really good soccer player, a basketball player, a baseball player. You were a multi-sport athlete before you ultimately decided on baseball.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I guess I'm a little concerned about the direction we're taking culturally, as far as really pushing these kids into one specific sport at an early age. Part of the joy of growing up, whether it was grade school, high school, was the fact that, you look forward to when, soccer would end and basketball would start, and basketball would end and baseball would start. I just really think that kids having a chance to play multiple sports is a huge part of the enjoyment of the whole athletic endeavor when you're young. But for these kids now to be forced to, doing, hockey year round or whatever sport it might be, I think it's a little bit detrimental just to the growth of their individual opportunities that they experience. I think that there's maybe a few exceptions. Some of the sports where you peak as maybe a 16, 17-year-old, whether it's a gymnast or some individual sport, figure skating. But generally, I think for kids to have an opportunity to play multiple sports is something that we should try to hold on to.
You overcame so much adversity and challenges in your career, like all professional athletes do. Way. What when you look back on it, how do you feel your faith played a role in guiding you along the way?
Yeah, well, I can get really long-winded in terms of a response to that. To be honest with you, I becoming a Christian at the end of my college days, there were many stages of my life over the past, 30, 40 years where people around me wouldn't have thought that I was living a Christian lifestyle. I got sidetracked. I call them strongholds that kind of invade your life, and you really have to put forth the effort to understand that there is a spiritual warfare going on and things that can happen. For me, in the late '70s and early '80s, Rich, there was a pretty large drug culture in Major League Baseball that I got involved with, and thank God was able to get out of before it caused too much damage. I've had issues, like I mentioned, personally with relationships and marriages that have failed, and I take full accountability for that. So, to have the faith that I do, I think that getting through the difficult times, I just thank God that he never gave up, gave up on me. And I think that the fact that, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever is really a hope that I hung on to during the dark times. And, I just think that even in today's world with the COVID and all the things and all the fear that's around us, that tries to get instilled by, news outlets and whomever, I just think that without that foundation of trusting that our eternity, life might be a little bit precarious right now, but our eternity is safe. We know what's going to happen. The battle's been won. And I think even all the challenges that I had personally dealing with life in 2020, I just really am grateful for the hope that Christ has allowed me to have in the way that I'm able to live my life.
He so desperately wants a relationship with us. It's amazing.
Yeah.
If you could go back and talk to a 21-year-old Paul Molitor, what
Yeah.
would you do today?
Well, I think part of life is that we need to go through things to learn and to grow. I mean, that's kind of what shapes who we end up becoming. But I think that the one thing that I would pass on to a younger version of myself, and even now in leadership, when I work with the minor leagues and young kids, it's that the world wants to put so much of our identity into how we perform or materialism. And I think you come to learn over time that your true identity is who you are as far as God's creation of you. Everything else is a sidebar to that. We are totally secure in the fact that he created us. He knows every fiber of our being. And I think a young Paul Molitor would have been someone who said, well, I'm constantly trying to prove myself. I want people to like me. I want to perform. I want to do all these things. And to tie up your identity and the value of who you are in those type of things is going to be shallow. It's going to be hollow, and it's not going to be sustainable. I think when you understand your identity is because God loves you, and he loved us enough. And even while we were still sinners, he sent Christ to die for us. I think once you can lock onto that, then everything else becomes a little bit easier as far as the journey that you embark on.
Paul, what's the most valuable lesson that you learned as a major leaguer and as a man of faith during those career?
Well, I think as a professional athlete, I think the humility to understand that, your giftedness is not of yourself. I mean, we work hard to develop the gifts we have, but to understand that it's certainly something that you've been given. That's part of it. But I think in terms of a man of faith, a lot of it just is coming to understand and be grateful for God's plan of salvation for us and how he desires to fellowship with each and every person that's created on this earth through the sacrifice of his son. So, I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned along the way. I think our experiences to understand that we are going to fall short, and our need for a savior. I mean, that's kind of the way that life is. But to keep grinding, to keep trying to grow, to try to be influential in a positive way for people that you encounter, whether it's your own kids or other people out there. But yeah, I just think that God's whole plan for our lives, which totally evolves around his son, is the most important thing that we can ever learn.
I mentioned that I went to a Jesuit high school and I had 4 years of Latin. And the one thing I remember from Father Almine was this. He used to always say, repetition est mater studiorum. Repetition is the mother of learning. And I just think back to a young Paul Molitor.
Yeah.
How many times at bat you had, at the playground, how many times you took, grounders, at third base or in the infield or shortstop. Sure. I think about how many times I went to the park and threw the ball at a tree or to a buddy of mine, just reps over and over and over again. And then, I look at it from a faith perspective. And I always say, like, if I would have spent the same amount of time that I spent in my playbook in the Bible,
wow, yeah,
I was playing, I would have been an all-pro Christian. You know what I mean? You talk about an all-pro quarterback,
right.
I just spent more time So I learned a long time ago that if you want something to become habitual, we've got to do it. Like, I think there's like, they did some research. It's like 6 weeks. So like, if I said to you this morning, you get up and brush your teeth, you didn't even think about it. It's just something that we do.
Sure.
But for something to be a habit, we need to do it over and over again. From a faith perspective, do you have a habit? Do you have a daily routine, whether it's readings, whether it's podcast or prayer or mass?
Well,
What's your daily
yeah.
routine?
Well, first of all, I'm impressed by the Latin. You know, I was an altar boy way back when at St. Luke's and St. Paul, and you know, that's when they were still doing the masses in Latin. And yeah, it's pretty good that you're able to recall that little phrase there. But
recall.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I do think that your point is so valid. I mean, the things we prioritize in life is in terms of what we give time to. You know, I mean, everything from our morning coffee to brushing our teeth to whatever. I mean, if we could somehow have the discipline in our spiritual lives to promote growth, you know, how much far along in our walk would we be? You know, for me, there's a few things that I do. I'm a devotional guy. I like that. I like to finish and start my day with something that alludes to the word in some capacity. I think my study routine, Rich, is more that I've been in a small men's Bible study group for, I don't know, 15 years through Grace Church out in Eden Prairie. And we have a small group. We call it our Iron Man group. And we go through different study topics. We just finished up the Victorious or Spirit-Filled Life study. And then I talked about my number one spiritual mentor, my former pastor from Wisconsin. We have a regular, we try to do a study on Zoom or in some capacity on a regular basis. And the biggest thing with him is that it's a prayer partner. I just don't know how many men feel comfortable that they can take time with another man and humble themselves before the Lord and be able to do that. So yeah, I always feel my walk is more enriched or I'm connected when I'm doing things more consistently, but it takes a little bit of spiritual discipline to do that.
It really does. That's well said. You know, if you could invite two people to join you, living or deceased, who would you invite and why?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the obvious answer for Christians is that there's Jesus. I mean, right? I mean, just I mean, we do have the right to and the opportunity to fellowship with him, you know, through prayer and through the Holy Spirit and all those things. But I obviously, when he walked the face of this earth, to be able to be at that time and sit down and share a meal and just absorb the wisdom and the knowledge firsthand would be incredible. And I think when you get to the second person, gosh, man, you could go down a lot of avenues of who would be interesting. I think of you know, some of our great American leaders as far as presidents, you know, Reagan and Lincoln and people like that. Just how intriguing and interesting that would be. And I think athletically, if I had one person, I might choose Jackie Robinson. You know, I think his story, his perseverance, the character and the humility he was able to show, even with all the suffering he had to endure. I just think it's one of the most memorable lives living in the past century in our country. And I think that would be a phenomenal opportunity to be able to listen to him share about some of his experiences.
You know, I'm not surprised, Paul, that you said Jackie Robinson. It's amazing the respect that the current players in today's game have for Jackie Robinson. A lot of them weren't even born when Jackie was running the bases.
Yeah. Well, you know, we all know what happened in our country over the past year. We all know what happened with George Floyd. Certainly to bring attention to issues of equality is tremendously important. But I think too how we have progressed, and not to say we don't have a long way to go. And there are reasons and there are people that have contributed to our advancement of those type of issues. And And I think the respect that today's players have for Jackie Robinson, I think it's so cool every year on Jackie Robinson Day when you see every major leaguer trotting out there in number 42. I mean, it just still gets a chill up your spine. I know that the years that I had as a manager when I got to wear number 42, it was a really special day. And I'm glad that we are, perpetuating his legacy and what he was able to do and the advancement of our human race because of his sacrifices.
All right, let's stick to some baseball questions. I know a lot of parishioners in St. Victoria have a lot of questions they want answered about your career and Major League Baseball. So let's go back. Your experience in baseball as a player and manager. What makes it such a great game?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of great games out there, Rich, but there's something about baseball. I think the fact that so many people participate in some capacity at young ages, it's baseball players come in all shapes and sizes. You don't have to be one certain way to be able to play the game. And I just think it's a tremendously family-friendly game. I mean, the experiences of, whether you're in a small town or big town and you're around little league games or tournaments on the weekend or 4th of July baseball events, it just, I think, really is something that it promotes family. And, I think in that regard, even today's game, although I'm finding it personally a little harder to watch with some of the changes the game's going through as far as, the 3 true outcomes and home runs and strikeouts and all those kind of things. I just think that it's something that families can do together, to whether it's participate, whether it's to go to games. And I think that adds to the greatness of the game of baseball.
You mentioned that a lot of us have the ability to participate. I played Little League Baseball, and I think about the number of people in our country that have played Little League Baseball.
Yeah.
And then the percentage that went on to play high school baseball, then a smaller percentage that went on to play college baseball at the Division I level, and then the smaller percentage that went on to get a chance to go play
Sure.
Major League Baseball, and then a percentage that made it from a farm system up to the major leagues. Someone that could last in the major leagues for 5 or 10 years, which is a phenomenal career.
Right.
But you lasted 21 years, and then you made it to the ultimate pinnacle, which is Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. And when you go back and do research and look at this, just the small number of players that are in the Hall of Fame. I mean, it's in any Hall of Fame, whether it's Pro Football Hall of Fame, it's the Baseball Hall of Fame. It is such a unique and just awesome experience. You have this incredible career, Paul, culminating your career in your nomination into the Baseball Hall of Fame. I know it's going to be hard for you, but what are 3 of your favorite moments of your baseball career?
Yeah. Well, I just want to recognize your career as well. I mean, I think we both have a pretty good perspective on the humility and our attitude of gratitude towards what we're able to experience. And you're right, man. The pyramid gets really small the higher you go, whether it's climbing the ladders from high school to college to minor league baseball to the top and then playing for a long time. And I think as we reflect back on that, when you're living it, you just kind of do the next thing. But when you look back, it's pretty incredible. Obviously to have an opportunity to play as long as I did. As far as great memories, I think our dream of getting there, the day that is fulfilled, is really a special day. For me, I was supposed to be in the minor leagues for another year, and our shortstop got hurt, and I went from being sent down to AAA to 5 days later playing opening day shortstop for the Brewers when I was 21 years old. And, to have my parents come down and to run out on that field, be 55,000 people, to take that all in, that was an incredibly memorable day. I mean, it's your first day in the big leagues, right? And I think the other couple that I would mention, the longer you play, you try to get yourself established, you try to get comfortable in the fact that you're doing what you're doing, but ultimately you want to win. And I was 21 years. I had 2 World Series opportunities. One when I was a pretty young kid in Milwaukee. I think it was about 25, and we lost in 7 games to the Cardinals. And I was disappointed, but I figured, well, hey, man, I'll have more opportunities, and I had to wait 11 more years to get back there, and that's when I went to Toronto. So, and I finally was a part of a team that could say that for that season, we were the best team in baseball. So, I think getting there was special, and then having an opportunity to play the pinnacle of our game, which is the World Series, a couple times, would be my top memories.
The relationships though that you make along the way with teammates and coaches and stuff are so important. What are some of your favorite teammates from your days with the Brewers, Blue Jays, the Twins? I mean, I know you played with a real cast of characters. Who are some of the guys that you had?
Yeah. I think that you remember a lot about the World Series and different individual things you might have done, but in reflection, and it's the relationships that you probably value the most. I was in Milwaukee for 15 years, and I'm not sure how many people would be familiar, but Robin Yount was my teammate. We were about the same age, and he had already played 4 years in the big leagues when I got there. I mean, he played at 18 in the big leagues, and I think Robin, became my best friend during that time, and we still are friends here today. And so that's a really special relationship. The fact that that spans 40 years now. When I went to Toronto, I spent 3 years up there. Jack Morris, another St. Paul guy.
Yeah.
I competed against Jack forever. High school, American Legion. He was with the Tigers forever. And 1993, we became teammates. And I think of all the things that we had experienced growing up in the same community and some of the same programs. And now we had a chance to share being major league teammates. That was probably a highlight for me from my Toronto years. And then coming back to Minnesota, I mean, a dream come true, right? You go for full circle. You get to come back and play for the team you followed as a kid. And while it was only for about a month, I got to be Kirby Puckett's teammate, and who could have imagined that end of that first spring training when I was with the Twins that Kirby would have the glaucoma issues that he did that would prohibit him from playing any longer. But I'll always remember walking into that clubhouse every morning at 7:00 and Kirby sitting over there with bags and bags of Egg McMuffins from McDonald's passing around to all the kids. And, it was a loud clubhouse from 7 a.m. till 5 every day. And he was the centerpiece. He was a special, special teammate. And I'm really glad that I had a chance to be around him for that time.
Paul, just to piggyback on that question, growing up in St. Paul and going to the U, you watched a ton of Twins games. You were a big fan of the Twins. Did you ever think that it would come full circle, that you'd wind up in a Twins uniform, and even probably more bizarre that you'd wind up being the skipper of the?
Yeah. Well, I think that, when we have our dreams when we're young, about being a professional athlete, I think somewhere in that dream is wearing the team that you followed, and for me growing up here, obviously I had huge connection to the Twins. But after I had been in Milwaukee for a while, Rich, I kind of turned into one of those guys who, I hope I play for a long time and I hope I never have to change uniforms. I just think that's kind of special for guys that can do that. There's not a ton of guys that play 15, 20 years and never have to change. You think of Robin Yount and George Brett and some of the guys that had the opportunity to do that. But once I left and went to Toronto, that was a great chapter. And I was, I was going to turn 40 that 40th year I came back to Minnesota. So it wasn't like you could plan on, playing the 40, first of all, and have an opportunity to come home. But it was fantastic. To be a Twin, to, for my family who had traveled around watching me play for 18 years, now I could get in the car and drive down to the Metrodome. It was pretty cool. And then after retiring, staying in the organization in various capacities before I finally had the opportunity to manage for those 4 years. And I used to pinch myself, man. I'd be in the dugout and we'd be managing games, and I'm going, I think about, following this team, and now I have a chance to be the skipper of my hometown team. It was great. The Twins have been great to me. It's been, over 20 years now since I've been connected to the organization. And it couldn't have worked out any better for me to be able to come back home after all those years.
All right, now I'm going to turn the heat up. A couple of controversial questions. You know this guy well. I've gotten the opportunity to meet him a couple of times. I really like Pete, but obviously Pete did some things that have kept him baseball's Hall of Fame. So just your thoughts
Yeah.
about whether Pete Rose should
Well,
be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, it's a tough question. A couple things about Pete. First of all, he was always great to me. Uh, I remember near the end of my playing days, I saw Pete at an off-season event, and he asked me how long I was going to play. And I said, I wasn't sure. He goes, well, I just want you to know if you get to 4,000 hits, I'm going to have to break your legs. So, and I think he was serious. I mean, he was so, he loves being the hit king, and he rightfully is. And, there are people in the Hall of Fame, including myself, that have some things in our closets that aren't too flattering, so it's hard to get too discretionary about another person's eligibility or candidacy for that tremendous honor. With no disrespect to Pete, let me tell you what I think. Every year in spring training in every clubhouse in baseball, they read the gambling rule, and it explicitly states consequences of what will happen. Now, including expulsion from the game. So if we overlook the fact that Pete did what he did and emphasize more the fact that he has more hits than anybody in the history of the game to make him eligible for Cooperstown, it pretty much would mean that every time we've read that rule in our clubhouse over the past 40 or 50 years, we didn't really mean it. And I think the integrity of how important the game feels that rule is, how they express it on an annual basis to every player who wears a uniform, it makes it really tough for Pete to overcome that hurdle in my mind.
In keeping with that, in terms of the integrity of the game and how important that is, and I know that you had great respect, and you're a person of great character, so that's always important to you, following the rules. But in light of the garbage can banging and that took place with the Astros, do you feel the punishment was justified? Was it adequate?
I think they could have done a little bit more. I don't know about specifically off the top of my head. I think that anything that we want to deter, the greater the penalty, I think the less likelihood of the offense. So it was unfortunate, a big black eye for our game, for Houston, for other teams that were scrutinized over some practices that they took on. I just think that you have to quelch and stomp on those type of things when they come up. So yeah, I mean, Houston got off a little bit easy, I think, not only in terms of maybe the actual penalty, but the fact that 2020 there wasn't a season and they have to do with fans. A lot of things that they were able to kind of skate through because of the way 2020 unfolded. But I think whether it's steroids or cheating or anything like that, increase the penalty, and I think you're going to decrease the crime.
The last question, and it's a good one, because I think if you're going to play professional sports, criticism comes with it. And
sure.
How did you handle it? How did you feel as a player, or even as a manager, to be criticized? You pick up the morning paper and they say you made a decision, or you had a couple bad at bats. That can be tough on a player.
It's tough.
How did you handle it? How did you tune out the negativity? And how did you grow from just dealing with some of the I wouldn't say constructive criticism, because it wasn't always constructive.
Not always, right.
The adversity that you deal with as a player and as a
manager.
manager.
Well, I think young players are particularly vulnerable to the criticism, whether it's through the media or just responses that we hear from fans. It takes a while to build up that thick skin, if you will. I think the more it goes back to your faith journey a little bit. The more comfortable you are and who you are, and knowing that you're doing everything you can to maximize the gifts that you've been given, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with some of the naysayers along the way. And from the managing perspective, Rich, deep in my soul, I always thought that leadership was about developing men. I think if you help develop men and character, that you're probably going to get a better player too, right? And there's external pressure to win, and that's what you say, and that's what you want to do. But, you're trying to develop these people as best that you can. And so when the criticism comes about how you're managing a team, or things that you're doing or not doing correctly, or you get second guessed for a decision in a game, it didn't bother me a ton, because I felt pretty good about what I knew my goals were in that regard. And to be honest, I guess if it stung a little bit, it was because of the fact that, a lot of times you read it or you hear it, you go, there's a part of this story that these people have no idea, as far as whether it's messaging from the front office or what you're trying to do in terms of big picture instead of short term. And so, you just have to understand that if you're confident in what you're doing and you believe you're doing it with integrity and you're trying to, fulfill your leadership role the best way that you possibly can, then you can handle some of that criticism a little bit better. And the last thing I'll say was really, that we're all about developing character and through perseverance and all those type of things. And I think anytime you go through those down periods where people are on your case about whatever it might be, I think it helps build you up in the long run.
Well, Paul, I would say this, you and I were lucky, 2 Catholic school kids growing up in different cities, both
Philadelphia.
Both dreamed of playing professional sports. You were lucky to get your opportunity in baseball. I was lucky to get my opportunity in football. And here we are some 30, 40 years later, just sharing our faith. So how awesome is that? And,
Yes.
I know that along the way, you always prayed and you always asked God to give you guidance and strength and before every game. And that's what I did. So I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that St. Victoria is an incredible parish, I'm proud of, and we just, on behalf of all the members of St. Victoria, we just want to thank you for all the great memories that you've brought us over the years as a player and as a manager, and taking time out of your busy schedule to share what the Lord is doing in your life. Thank you, brother.
Well, hey, I'll just close by saying, Rich, I got a lot of respect for you too. And the fact that you're willing to give your time as well to help with this little interview process, I think it speaks volumes about who you are. And I just would close and trying to encourage people in today's world with some of the things we're experiencing, the social unrest and the virus and, political acrimony and all those type of things, that, when we're grounded in being the people that God intended us to be, and to understand that, everything that around that we deal with, it really is going to be temporal. When we can focus things that are unseen, things that are more eternal, it's just going to give us tremendous hope going forward. But great to chat with you, man. It's good to hang out a little bit. We'll have to do something once we can get back out into a social atmosphere of breaking some bread together or something.
Yeah, brother, I appreciate it. And I just want to wish Father Bob and all the members of St. Victoria Parish a happy and holy New Year. Stay safe and God bless.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Paul. Great interview. Much appreciated. With the way things are in the world today, it's so easy to get pulled off course in life. And that's why Paul's message meant so much, that his message inspires us to see the possibilities that life has when we let faith be the driving force in our lives. So again, thanks, Rich, and thanks, Paul. Best to you. And the idea behind building bridges, let me say just a bit about it. The idea is that ordinary people like you and I can make a difference in the world. And we do it every time we reach out and build a bridge. We make a connection that does make a difference in the world. And so with that in mind, I'm going to have Mike Ramler, Chair of Building Bridges, offer this prayer reflection. Mike?
Thank you, Father Bob. Happy New Year, everyone. And thanks again, Rich and Paul, for the great message earlier today. I wanted to say thanks again for everybody for joining in. As we built over the years the Building Bridges Breakfast, we have dubbed a phrase, big or small, build a bridge, not a wall. Now more than ever, that's very important. And I wanted to share a prayer by Joy Crowley called The Bridge. There are times in life when we are called to be bridges. Not a great monument spanning a distance and carrying loads of heavy traffic, but a simple bridge to help one person from here to there. A bridge which opens the way for ongoing journey. When I become a bridge for another, I bring upon myself a blessing. For I escape from the small prison of self and exist for the wider world. Breaking out to be a larger being who can enter another's pain and rejoice in another's triumphs. I know of only one greater blessing in this life, and that is to allow someone else to be a bridge for me. Thanks again for joining. And Rich, Paul, thanks again. Father Bob.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to the Building Bridges team that took care of all the details today. A big thanks to you for joining in. Hope you can do the same next year with next year's event. And in the meantime, remember, you can make a difference. Reach out, build that bridge, and watch what God does with that. So take care, be well, and until next time, God's peace. Thank you.